Welcome, everyone. I'm Stacey Harris, Chief Research Officer for Sapient Insights Group, and we're really excited to have you join us today for the Dovetail, Sapient, and Danone conversation around creating a great employee experience. I'm going to go ahead and get started this morning with a little bit of housekeeping. I'm going to hand it over to Zoe, who's our webinar coordinator. And Zoe, can you talk everybody through some housekeeping questions that we know everybody has when you do a webinar?
Yes, absolutely. So first, welcome everyone. Please direct all of your questions to the question and answer box. We will get to some of them throughout the presentation, and those that we do not, we'll try to answer afterwards. If you have any technical issues, please send us a chat directly. And just a reminder, a copy of the presentation deck, a recording, as well as a survey for some of your feedback is going to be sent to your emails. So lastly, enjoy, take notes, ask questions, and we're happy you're all here.
Great. And I'm just realizing that my screen wasn't showing, so we're just going to do a little bit of a minute of a sharing, making sure you guys are getting to see my screen. And there we go. We're going to share, and we're going to put this back in the format. Welcome to the age of Zoom, guys. Everything takes a few moments. All right. Looks like we got the right screen showing today. So as Zoe said, thanks Zoe so much. As you can see on the screen, Q&A questions deck will be delivered. Please let us know if you have any questions after that. All right, let's go ahead and get started with today's conversation. So it's going to be a really fun conversation. If you haven't had an opportunity to talk about experience platforms and where the market is heading and what that looks like when it comes to HR service delivery, this is the presentation and conversation for you, because we've had an opportunity to have a lot of conversations with the team here around that. We're really excited about spending a little bit of time walking through some of the key findings that we had at Sapient Insights on the HR service delivery and workforce experience connection. And we'll spend a few minutes in that. And then we're going to talk a little bit about the difference between help desk tools and HR service delivery platforms as it relates to this conversation around experience. And then Crystal and Kelly are going to spend some time with us answering some questions around how the project that Crystal did around building an experience for her organization really played out, and what kind of things worked well, what things didn't work well, what things we want to be able to share with the audience around how they might be able to take this information and leverage it in their own experience, conversations, and strategies going forward. So we're really excited about where we're heading with this. All right, let's talk a little bit about who's on the panel today. So as I said, those of you who might not know me, I'm the Chief Research Officer at Sapient Insights and Managing Partner. Sapient Insights is a research and advisory firm that we focus on HR systems as well as finance and enterprise applications. Our goal really is to help organizations gather the data they need to make big decisions that they're trying to make around their HR practices, enterprise practices, and systems that support all those areas. And one of the things that we've looked at a lot recently is the enterprise space around experience platforms. We also run a big annual survey. Many of you know us from that. That survey is where you're going to see some of the data that comes from here. If you have any questions about the data I'll be talking about today, feel free to just ping us, and we'll make sure you get access to our key findings, which was released just last month, and to our big annual report that will be released in a few weeks. So we're really excited about sharing this on an annual basis with the market. Also today we have with us Kelly Frisby, who is Marketing Director over at Dovetail, and has had the long-term opportunity to not only work with Dovetail, but also work with Crystal on some case studies and information. Kelly, can you maybe just say hello to everyone and give a little bit more about your background before joining Dovetail?
Yeah, this is Kelly. So I'm the Marketing Director at Dovetail. So we're an HR service delivery technology company, and I'm mainly focused on communicating our offer.
And then Crystal, who her and I have had a lot of great conversations. Crystal is the Director of HR Operations for Danone North America. And Crystal has had the, good or not so good sometimes, it's always been a tough job, right? Of really changing how Danone does HR experience these days, right? So Crystal, maybe just a little welcome to the audience and a little bit about you and your background for everyone.
Yeah, good morning, everybody. So I'm Crystal Carter. As Stacey mentioned, I am the Director of HR Operations at Danone North America. If you guys haven't heard of Danone, we are a French company. We're multinational food products. and a lot of brands that you probably know. So we have been, over the last few years, I've been with Danone for 3 years, and I have been really focused on that employee and the manager experience and how we can, justify that and make that and improve that throughout our organization. I come from a background of service delivery. I've actually worked in a shared services type of space for the last 15 years, and really have used a lot of different tools and platforms. And I'm really excited to kind of share the work that I've done with the Dovetail team and how it's impacted Danone.
Perfect. This is gonna be such a fun conversation because when I was first talking to Crystal and Kelly about the work they had done together, there were more tidbits about sort of how things had changed and what tools were actually working and how you were actually changing the way HR did work, that I was like, oh, this is really cool. We're gonna get into some nitty-gritty conversation. So if you're looking for a place where someone's going to talk about the details, this is definitely going to be the conversation today. But before we dive into all the great stuff that Crystal had done and the conversation around the work that Kelly does with Dovetail, I wanted to sort of open the conversation up a little bit with what's happening in the employee experience area. And the first thing you have to understand is that employee experience is not just about a single platform, although there are a lot of solutions out there in the market that are trying to create this sort of big platform conversation. What we're finding in our data, at least in our research, is that the employee experience and all the outcomes that you're trying to achieve from it, because it does come down to outcomes, both for the employee and the end user and the business organization. All those outcomes are driven by your entire HR technology ecosystem. So everything from your core HRMS to your benefits applications, to your communication tools within the organization, to your time and attendance and talent management solutions, even the analytics solutions, which you may not think are directly impacting employees because maybe they're not seeing reporting every day. The process that goes through sort of getting that up to an executive level, sharing that with managers within the organization, and how that data is interpreted, then eventually has an impact on the employee, because how that data is used is going to be the next step that's most critical. So from what we're seeing in the market, this is a much broader conversation than any one single application. And more importantly, is it comes really a difficult conversation that many organizations, I think, are struggling with, because the employee experience maybe that we thought was important 5 years ago, even 2 or 3 years ago, has changed right now because of what's happened with the COVID crisis, because of the fact that we now have hybrid workforces, because there's a large portion of our workforce that is maybe working in different locations. We're really focusing on trying to make sure people are feeling like they belong. So there's a diversity, equity, inclusion component to the conversation. All of those things go into employee experience, which I think previously it was much more of a conversation just about the life cycle or about the look and feel of the technology. And so we're going to cover all of that today. One of the things we asked in our research this year, again, 2,500 organization data sets is in our research. So just to give you a scale and scope of what we asked, a global data set with organizations all around the world, and organizations of every size, from the smallest organization all the way up to the largest organization. One of the things we asked this year, which is a brand new question, is what's the best description of your current HR application and processes employee experience? Like, what is the experience you feel your current organization is achieving from the current applications you have in place? And when we looked at this data, on average, the two things that we saw come out most often were either an approach to collaboration and teamwork that organizations felt that their systems were creating, or much more of a self-reliant standards and policies kind of a solution, right? And there were sort of two sides of that picture. If you were an organization that was over 500 employees, you were much more likely to say that your systems were creating a collaboration and teamwork environment. If you were an organization under 500 employees, you were much more likely to be focused on things. I mean, there's still collaboration there, but you were also seeing a lot more focus on standards and policies, manager-led, self-reliance. And you also saw more innovation in the conversation and flexibility in the work environment. The other thing that you'll note is that we had a pretty large population that said that there was all of our options that we gave them, whether it was manager-led or diversity and belonging or innovation and flexibility, none of that fit. They said that they had others, we got these comments like, we have an environment of chaos, a confusing maze of disjointed. Nil. I love the nil one. I was like, that's just someone who's just very succinct about what they think our experience is. My favorite one by far, though, was the culture of optionality. What is a culture of optionality? And Crystal, I'm going to ask you about that when we get to our case study, because I think a culture of optionality just says so many things in a lot of different ways. But really, the big thing is that I think the market is saying, we don't know, there was no one particular thing that we were saying was our experience that our systems are creating today. And in many cases, they aren't always achieving the things that we want them to. There's a difference between what we think they're achieving and what we want them to achieve. So the other thing that we started to look at is, so how are organizations sort of defining this experience market, right? And what we saw pretty clearly was that there was really, it wasn't, you know, I got this great question. I'm in Chicago this week, and we're having conversations with a lot of customers and clients and organizations who were talking about experience platforms. And one of them asked us if we had mapped out all the touch points for an employee in every process area. It's like, well, we haven't, but I'm not exactly sure that's how people are creating their employee experience process anyways, because I think every employee has a different experience. And every role within the organization has different experiences. And what we're seeing more of the organizations have a conversation about is not all the touch points, but much more is whether or not they want to have a relationship through their service delivery model that is either high touch or low touch for certain roles in the organization, and whether they want that experience to be more collaborative, like we saw on the previous slide, where a lot of organizations' current systems are, or whether we need that experience to be more self-reliant because we need more automation, or we need more opportunities for people to be able to get the information on their own. And what we're finding is that organizations are kind of creating across the roles in their organizations, they're kind of picking and choosing which of these sort of levels they want to balance inside their experience platform area. And once they have figured out what that looks like, the kind of levels they want of high touch, low touch, collaboration, or self-reliance, then they can start looking at the applications like their learning platforms or their HRISs or their help desk solutions, figuring out which of those tools will give them the best outcome that they're trying to achieve. And then ultimately the goal is to create a experience that rolls into relationships with your employees and managers and the journeys. You'll hear a lot about these journeys. We'll talk a little bit about that as we're getting into the questions. But if you're creating a journey conversation, that's the employee's view of what your HR service delivery model is really. If you're creating a front door, again, that means you've got to have a lot of things tied together and collaborated into a single platform page. And again, that's the employee's experience, but you have to pull a lot together from the HR service delivery to get there. So there's sort of the mirror image or flipped sides of the coins, as we call it, when people are putting this together. And this is how we're seeing people are buying these technologies. Again, not a single platform, not deciding it from all the touch points of their employees, but looking at more around the sort of matrix of decisions that they've got to make and the technologies that meet it. So let's get into a little bit about what that looks like from a systems perspective. One of the things that we saw in our research is that if you were looking at just traditional help desks, that there was really just a few players in the market who were able to provide sort of a help desk conversation to the experience platform component. You saw a lot of traditional help desk solutions that are IT focused, like Zendesk and Atlassian, Salesforce. You also saw a couple of HR focused ones that includes Dovetail in there, as well as Workday and Oracle HCM. And then you saw some organizations that were sort of in the middle, like ServiceNow, that basically, you know, it did both sides of that picture. But we're also seeing a lot of organizations look at technologies, and this gets back to that conversation I had about leveraging all of your technologies, who have a picture that looks much more like this. It's a much more complex environment that has both a help desk component, the journeys conversation, the employee and the manager self-service. And this is where we're seeing probably a lot more organizations settle. And ultimately what you're finding is that here organizations need to understand, again, that outcome they're trying to achieve. We're also seeing a lot of organizations focus on communication, feedback, and performance as a part of the help desk, as part of the experience conversation. And those tools like surveying tools and analytics tools and document management communication tools are critical as well. But we're finding that a lot of times if you just use one component of this picture, or you try and focus on just your HRIS or just your self surveying tools, you miss out on a lot of the information that might happen in a really strong workflow, or as you're talking about the process management that you need to have from more of a case management kind of a model. And so one of the things we wanted to talk about today in the case study is to really understand where we're finding things like case management that oftentimes is sort of pigeonholed into a certain area. We're finding it really making a big difference in the experience platform world. When we talk to organizations, 50% of them who had a help desk solution, they were also using that solution for their portal and communications application. A third of the HR help desk buyers were also using that solution for purchasing content management. And 30% of organizations who had some sort of a help desk or case management tool were also using that for a strong employee and manager self-service tools. And that's the kind of stuff that's really interesting to see, because I don't think that we always think about your case management help desk tool at the center of the employee experience. But our data is finding that it's as important in some cases as the HRMS, as well as some of the communication tools like Microsoft right now. And that's really what this case study is all about. So I know you guys listen to me talk a lot about sort of the basic information, but I'm going to open this up, Crystal, to you. One of the things that I know you've really been focused on creating a new employee experience. Can you talk a little bit about, share with everyone the journey you've recently went on with Danone? You know, who is Danone and what were the challenges you were facing that really led to this experience transformation that you recently put in place?
Yeah, I'd love to. So, as I started to mention before, Danone is a French company where are a CPG company and have a lot of brands that you probably know, like Stoke Coffee and Oikos and Light and Fit and Silk and Horizon. So many things that you guys are hopefully using every day. And what my job was here is we went under an initiative that wanted to really expand our approach and make it a more end-to-end service platform. So as Stacey mentioned, we really wanted to focus on really improving that employee experience. And we wanted to be able to make it a dynamic, like one-stop shop for HR information, really allowing employees to utilize that self-service opportunity and find consistent answers to their questions, make sure we had a place where we had all of the up-to-date materials. And then if they couldn't find what they were looking for, we wanted to be able to have a platform to where they could ask their questions, and those questions would go to the subject matter expert that was there to help and assist. And one of our other really big goals was to reduce the administrative burden and take on these non-value added activities with our higher level HR professionals and kind of move it into an organization where we could specialize that and allow them to work on more strategic items and where their focus really should be.
I love when you talk about the fact that, HR, you were thinking about the employee experience, but you also had to think about the experience of the HR professional, right? You've said that a couple times in there. And I think oftentimes it's not that we forget, but it's just that we're so used to thinking about everybody else in the organization, right? And one of the things that I know in our data set is that we saw that organizations had lost on average about 30% of professionals in the HR roles who had 10 years or more tenure, right? In their specific roles. Now, they may have gone on to other organizations, they may have gone into different, they may have retired. There's a lot of reasons why we lost some of those skill sets, but some of it was because they were frustrated, right, with the amount of work, right? And like I said, we were just at an event where large organizations were talking about one of the facts that they had when they were recruiting people is that people asked them what systems they were using because they knew if they were on older systems or they hadn't connected their systems, it was going to be harder work, right? And so those are some of the things I think you just talked about how passionate it is about connecting those dots. Kelly, you've worked with Crystal a little bit on the case study and the work that Dovetail has done in sort of creating a relationship with Danone to make sure she achieved her outcomes. You once mentioned to me she was a perfect customer. I don't hear that too often. Could you maybe just, because she just explained what they were trying to achieve, maybe you could give the audience a little bit of understanding of what makes a perfect customer, right?
Well, I mean, apart from having a fantastic personality, which I know from talking to Crystal, doing interviews for case studies, but apart from that, Crystal, she really had a clear vision of where she wanted to go from the very first meeting that we had, from my understanding. And this really helped our joint teams to work together to deliver on that vision. So I think regarding the relationship, the sales, implementation and customer success teams have all got a really good understanding of HR service delivery and the kind of customer pain points as well. So I think that helped with the relationship, and they followed a project management methodology. So I think the combination of, this kind of professionalism from our side, but also working with somebody who basically knew where she was going, that really made things run smoothly.
Thanks, Kelly. Oh, I'm so sorry. I wanted to just add on to that. I think that having everybody that we have partnered with at Dovetail really does understand what the vision that I'm trying to accomplish is. And because they're specializing in that within this HR space, it really has helped them. Like, we speak the same language. They understand what I'm trying to accomplish. And I think that's really helped our relationship as well. Using different platforms in the past, in my past experience, I've had different levels of success with a case management and knowledge management platform. And I was so excited to see how excited Dovetail was about their product and how they really care and listen to what my experience is so that they can make their product be that much better for me. So just wanted to add that on there.
No, that was great, Crystal, because I was just going to say, so much of our research data basically shows that the vendor themselves, an individual software doesn't always make a big impact, right? Like a lot of the softwares do a lot of the same things. But what we have found makes a big difference is when the customer and the vendor really work well together. And a lot of that comes down to, I think, to some extent, the customer being open to where the vendor is at, and vice versa. Kelly, I loved what you said about the fact that Crystal had vision. You don't know how many times I've talked to organizations and we ask them, if you could do it all over again, what would you do? The number one thing we hear is, I wish I had had a better strategy or a better vision of what it was that I was trying to achieve. So I think, all of this is always a conversation about, how we get these pieces to fit together, right? And, one of the things, Crystal, that you and I had talked a lot about was that difference between, what was the HR service delivery, sort of project versus what was the experience before and the experience after. And I know you have a couple of slides here on the various project itself and the experience before and after. Can you maybe just walk us a little bit through the slide here, which is, I think, your project details. And I think this next slide gets into the before and after picture, because I think people need to understand sort of the details of what you guys went through, right?
Yeah, it was a huge transformation. We completely are changing the way that employees are interacting with HR. In our previous model, employees were required to go to multiple systems and or people to find the answers to their HR questions. The information was extremely decentralized. We had multiple different tools that you had to kind of instinctually know where to go and find that information, which left for a lot of room for error, quite honestly. Things were hard to access. We didn't really encourage employee or manager self-service because we had our environment is very complex, right? We have both the US and Canada. We have multiple different locations that have different collective bargaining agreements that we needed to make sure that we were understanding. And so as a result, basically the way our previous model was set up was that anytime an employee had a question, they had to go to their HR business partner to ask that question and get the support that they needed. So it was our HR business partners, which are a higher level professional that, you know, were having to answer these really day-to-day mundane questions that really could have been answered by going to some sort of platform. We had an intranet that had some HR content on it. It wasn't super comprehensive or easy to navigate, and it often wasn't kept current because it was really difficult to manage that and work with the different platforms to get things up to date. Employees knew they really couldn't rely on that information, and so they didn't even really waste their time, and they would just go straight to a person. Yeah, so part of that was just that we just didn't have a way to really secure these materials because we have these different populations that have different information that we wanted to be able to share with them without causing confusion with other groups. And our internet just didn't allow for that. But thankfully, when we partnered with Dovetail and we moved into more of a tiered service delivery model, really setting up that self-service. So we used Dovetail's platform to create over 850 different like knowledge articles where now employees and managers can go and get the answers to the questions that they need themselves. And because of the different persona capabilities within Dovetail, I'm able to really filter that information so that I can keep everything in one place, but I have securities that make sure that people are only seeing what they should be seeing. And then if they can't find the answers to their questions, they can open a case within Dovetail, and that has extremely changed the way that employees are interacting with us. We've only recently gone live, but we've definitely seen a huge people, our employees are loving the platform. It's so user-friendly and exciting. And then, as you mentioned earlier, Stacey, our HR professionals are also loving the platform. It's making their day-to-day job so much easier. Yeah, so.
Well, and that's, I think you were just getting into where I was going to head to the next question, which was metrics, right? And what are the measures you're having to know that you had accomplished what you set out to accomplish? And one of the things you told me is about what they're accessing. I think you also had now, just so people know, this is not ESG as in environmental, social, or governance. This is ESG as an employee. This
Employee
is your
Services Genie is what we have rebranded.
You named it Genie, right? Yeah. So Employee Services Genie, these were some of the metrics that you had pulled here that we've got up on screen, correct?
Right.
And this is some of the stuff that your HR professionals would have had to do by hand previously, right?
Right. So that was something that we really wanted to gain by moving to this new model and using technology, is we wanted to be able to be much more data driven, and we wanted to know what employees are looking at, what are the things that they care about, are they happy with the materials that we were putting out there? If they have a question, how quickly are they getting responded to? Are they happy with the answer that they're getting? And we didn't have any insight into any of that in our previous model because everything was going through the employee, through the HR business partner, or through the specific center of excellence. And so it really didn't provide us as a leadership team the ability to see the big picture about where we really should be putting our resources and what's working and what's not. And at this point, we've just barely started to scratch the surface with all of the analytics that we can have, because it's something that we didn't really have before. Something like SLAs, we had them, they were unwritten, but there was no way to monitor that anybody was keeping to them. And so now, basically what we've done is we haven't done a whole lot with the data for the first 6 months that we launched the tool. We were really looking to gather data. We put SLAs in place, we put different things in place as a guest. And so what we're trying to do now is to utilize that data to see how well we did with some of our guesstimations in the beginning. And then we're also using it to see, how employees are leveraging the system. I think it's been really exciting for us to be able to now have visibility into the different types of things that they're clicking on. You know, you can see at the bottom of this screen here, we had over 1,900 employees like click on some information that was about mid-year performance reviews. We had just gone through that part of the cycle. And so now we're able to say, hey, here's the materials, and were they effective? Were they accessed? What kinds of questions do they have? It just opens up a whole new world that we never had the ability to do before.
I love this because only about 20% of organizations actually take the time to do some sort of adoption metrics of any of their HR systems, right? So just tracking this, you're ahead of most of organizations. The other thing I thought that was sort of interesting about this was that, you know, you guys had other HR systems before this. You have HRMSs, you has time management tools, all those kind of things, right? And you could have sort of captured, but you would have had to sort of aggregate them, right? So with this is all sort of coming through a single environment, which is helping, is what I'm understanding.
Yeah, absolutely.
Go ahead. I was just gonna say, did you have anything to add to that before I ask Kelly?
Yeah, no, I think that's absolutely true. And I think that that's another, you know, great advantage that Dovetail has been able to provide, right? The system has a lot of dashboards and metrics. And so it comes with some out of the box things, maybe things that I hadn't even always considered in my past life. I think that it's exciting for me now because even though I had used previous case management and knowledge management tools, it had very limited reporting and dashboard capabilities. And so it's exciting now to be able to utilize this data, you know, in a way that we can actually be more effective.
Yeah, it's one of the top things we saw in the data sets this year is that organizations were 30% more likely this year to say that the lack of reporting was a big issue and a big reason why they gave low user experience and vendor stat scores to all HR applications this year. So reporting is key. Kelly, just to sort of, you know, you see a lot of organizations who have sort of implemented, you know, sort of Dovetail and the case management tool. Are there other ways and other measurements that you've seen your clients use to help them sort of track this idea of experience or this idea of engagement with their audience? With your system or anything else that they're working with?
Well, I mean, one of the main metrics that is used is the first contact resolution rate. But in regards to the employee experience, I mean, when I've spoken to customers, they might be talking about, you know, the usage of the employee portal. So how many people have logged in, you know, what pages they're looking at, how often, as I mentioned, how often they're logging in. You know, what's the engagement rate of, you know, how many employees as a percentage have logged into the site. So I know, for example, from speaking to Crystal, even when they did the launch with the employee portal, they use various techniques. So I remember one was a scavenger hunt to increase the usage rate of the portal. I think also knowledge management utilization rates, again, measuring how people are engaging in this kind of technology.
I know, and it seems like such a little thing to know, like someone touched a page, but when we're talking about engagement, that means they've looked for something, they're trying to get access to it. And then if they've taken an action after that, it's the big conversation, right?
Right. That's the way that I look at it, because before they didn't have the option to go touch a page. They had to really go talk, you know, reach out to their HR business partner, wait for that person to get back to them to get that information. And that HR business partner may have had to go work with a specific team, maybe payroll or benefits or comp, to get the information because they didn't have a library of information that they could necessarily refer back to as well. So I look at these as every time we get a hit, it's a win. It's an email that didn't have to be sent to somebody, you know, manually having to ask the question. So definitely improving the employee experience.
I love that. It's a win every time we get a touch. And I think you actually had some employee feedback here, right? Like, can you just talk a little bit about how you gathered this?
Yeah, so when we launched to our employees, we actually decided to do several employee calls. So I hosted 4 different employee calls, kind of just talking about it. We worked with our Corp Comms team, of course. We did a lot of, you know, different teasers. We were on town halls and all hands and all of those things to kind of let people know we were coming. But then I actually just had a call where I opened up the lines for employees, invited them to come on, gave them an overview of the tool, and then gave them like a live demo. It was such an engaging experience. We got most of these comments either from those calls, from different emails that we've gotten back. We have had a huge adoption rate. People are so excited about the tool. And in most cases, like, there will always be a subset of people that don't want to go look for themselves. You're not going to solve for that. But there are so many people that want to help themselves. And if they can get an answer faster, and they can do it by themselves without having to go through a bottleneck, they're definitely going to do it. And I feel like this is such a win in that way, because our employees are really seeing the benefit of that.
Yeah, it's funny, we often get the sort of mislabeling sometimes that it's only the younger generation that wants to use these automated systems, right? But I know when we actually did our data set, we did a bit of an employee survey. It's probably about 2-3 years ago now, but in that one, what we found is that is not exactly, sometimes younger was a little more hesitant to use information straight off the screen, where someone who was a little more experienced in the organization was thrilled that they could just get access and go and be able to move forward, right? So I think, we've also got to sort of remember that every employee is at a different place in their journey, right? And the flexibility is what's powerful, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Well, let's talk. I know we've talked a little bit, Kelly, about that experience that you had talked about, the difference between where it was at previously and what it looked like before. But maybe you can talk a little bit about the HR specific difference. Like, what impact did it have on your employees and the HR professional in the organization? Besides just the fact they had to do less administration, that's always good. But maybe a little bit more about how they felt about being more strategic. I know you're still early in the stage, but is that something you can talk a little bit about?
Yeah, so that was, like I said in the beginning, one of our major goals, because all of these really transactional questions were going to our HR business partner community. It was keeping them busy with busy work, as opposed to really allowing them the time to work on those strategic initiatives that they should be working on to really support the business and add value. So we've definitely, a few of the things that we did. So we focused a lot on the change management of it. We really looked at, how these roles would be affected long-term, how their different responsibilities would be affected, what potential apprehension they may have. Like, of course, we have certain part of our HR population that likes answering those day-to-day questions, that likes that interaction, and maybe felt a little threatened by that, or was worried that they were going to lose the Danone touch, that really like personal touch. And what I'm trying to show them is that we can do all of that through a very easy user platform that has some friendly people at the back end, there to support it and help support that question as they go forward. So really the experience before Dovetail, we had so many different systems. HR professionals really had a hard time like finding the book of record, the real source of truth. Very often they were like, is this the latest version, or is this the latest version?
Yeah.
And it was a really difficult experience. I think you touched on it earlier, that we were seeing a high level of employee turnover in that HR space, because they didn't feel like they were adding strategic value. They felt like all they were doing was this non-value added work. And honestly, I can go to another company and get the same level of job and have an easier role of it. And so I think that that was something that we really wanted to address. So I think in addition to trying to take all of the employee questions off of their plate, and only escalate a small subset to them that actually they need to be involved in, they don't need to be involved in a question about how do I update my direct deposit, or what's my group number. But those were kinds of questions that were going to them because we didn't have another platform to be able to answer that. So what our new vision is to really empower our employees. That'll hopefully really align with our new hybrid ways of working and support our employees that are in all of our different locations, And really, we're also not just the employee questions, but we're looking at our processes across the board and how can we harmonize them? How can we leverage our Dovetail functionality to help us to improve those ways of working as well, and kind of take even more of that administrative burden off of the other professionals in HR.
I think it's so powerful when what you just talked about change management in the context of not just the employee, but in the context of HR itself, that there's a little fear there. There's a little, concern. And I think it's so powerful and probably a big part of success, right? Is that you thought about everybody that was impacted. And so often we just think about one role or a couple roles. The other thing I think you mentioned that is powerful is that, yes, you took administrative items off the plate. That was a big part of it. I think automating those kind of things is always, any HR system that does that is valuable. But you also talked about the fact that you elevated the strategic work that they were doing, right? That it made the work they were doing more impactful in the organization. They got to deal with the things that have the biggest impact. Maybe just this wasn't one of the questions we had prepared for. So if you don't have an answer, it's fine. But I like, you had mentioned how you're kind of thinking about doing this across other areas in the organization. And I bet our audience would probably be interested in HR is involved in a lot of things, from the talent process, the compensation roles, to the learning and development, to all. Can you talk a little bit about how you're figuring out ways to make sure that this work that you're doing here ties a little bit with the other HR processes? Because you said you're looking at how you can maybe simplify them. Because I think a lot of people feel like this might be separate from maybe the work they're doing in talent management, or separate from the work they're doing in administering their HRIS system. Do you think these are more tightly connected than they often think?
I absolutely do. I think that, at least in our case, our processes, our systems, all are interconnected. And unfortunately, because of some of our business complexities, we have had historically a lot of really manual processes. And so being able to leverage, just by cleaning up something and documenting it, and now leveraging the technology to ensure that we keep that going forward, and that we have metrics to be able to ensure that we're doing that, it makes us so much more powerful. And it really allows us to focus on being more strategic. I would say that historically, we've spent a lot of time as an organization fighting fires. And this work that we're doing, once we do it, I feel like it's not putting a Band-Aid on the situation, it's actually solving the solution. And so therefore, it does take a little bit of work to get it done, but there's such a wonderful result at the end, because it really empowers the employees.
Yeah, it is amazing when you start to sort of look out at how many, I think we're excited to see more automation in the environment, but when we really talk to a lot of organizations, even though they have a system or two, it doesn't mean they've automated all their areas, right? Which I think is what you're basically saying, is that because of the acquisitions, the different regions, right? It's just really easy to go back to paper, or go back to at least a manual process in some cases, versus sort of figuring out how you can leverage the tools.
Yeah.
One of the questions I think we really wanted to get into was about how you engaged the customers and leveraging this tool. And I think we've talked about a couple of things. You did the scavenger hunt, you did the change management approach, those type of things. Is there anything else that we haven't mentioned? Because I know the audience would be really interested in this, in that as we prepare HR and get HR ready, getting the end users to use it is often just about sort of getting them comfortable with it. But would you say, what's the difference between why they chose, or maybe why they're being more engaged with this than they might have been with any other HR technologies that you guys have rolled out?
I think that part of it is, in my experience, Dovetail's really user friendly, and I think it's very intuitive. Sometimes case management systems aren't, and so I think that's really allowed me to create a foundation for both the employee side to make it really easy for them to navigate. I actually created different icons and had it be very similar to their phone experience, since so many people are used to that. but then I think that on top of that, you know, having this persona capability in Dovetail, and basically what that is so Dovetail receives a feed every night from our HCM, which is Dayforce, and it has all of the employee details in it. And so what that allows us to do is to be able to filter that information into different categories, which we've called personas. We have 12 different personas that we've created, and it's basically the difference between the US and Canada. It's the difference between an employee and the manager. It's a difference between the employee, the manager, and HR, and those different experiences. And then within our employee populations, we have several different collective bargaining agreements that we also needed to be able to manage. And so with this persona functionality, that has really allowed that to happen. But going back to what you were saying as far as change management, I think it was really important. We met with all of the leadership. We went to all of their team meetings and really let them know, like, this is what we're trying to accomplish, and these are the benefits that we're going to get out of this. Really answered their questions and got their buy-in so that they could also be champions for our project. We did go to team meetings, town halls. We're also like proactively working with each of the centers of excellence. So like the benefits, payroll, compensation teams, et cetera. And we're looking to say, like, how can we make your jobs easier by leveraging the system? And so like they're becoming champions and getting really excited and driving employees to the system. And I think it's just all of those things is really, you know, focusing back on how do we drive behavior to go there intrinsically so that they have to find something else. And then while they're there, oh yeah, there's all this other great information there too. So those were some things that we did. We did host those calls. The scavenger hunt was great as far as we had different things. They had to go search all over the site. And like I said, we have over 800 different articles. So allowing them to kind of get used to navigating the site in a fun way and realize that it's not so scary, because people are afraid of change. And unfortunately, historically, we haven't been the best at rolling out new systems and making them user-friendly for our employees. And so I wanted to make sure that I went the extra mile to know that like they were front of mind when we created the system.
I promised you guys that you would get the nitty gritty, and I hope you're realizing you're getting we're talking about how you integrated data and the actual practices you did. So hopefully everyone is taking notes rapidly, but remember this is recorded. Let's just, I know we have a couple people got some hands up, so I'm going to wrap up some of our questions that we had here with this. I want to ask, so Kelly, I'm going to ask you this first, and then I'll do a last question for Crystal. Is, you know, Crystal's talked a lot about all that the Danone has done, and she's probably been a little humble about how much she's personally done. You sat through, I think, probably 3 or 4 interviews with you, done a couple case studies with her. Could you maybe share from your perspective, like, I know we talked about what it means to be a good customer, but what are some of the things that maybe Crystal hasn't mentioned just because she didn't realize that maybe it was some of the work she did, or that Danone maybe has done that you thought, wow, this is really powerful. People should be aware of how they've approached this.
Well, the first thing that came to mind when I was thinking of this is really it's clear to me that Crystal was the main driving force behind the modernization of HR service delivery at Danone. That's my belief from talking to Crystal, and I know from that she had previous experience in this kind of area, but it's also clear that she's really passionate about delivering a first-rate employee experience for the employees at Danone. So I know we talked about the vision, and that might have already been discussed, but that clarity of vision and then having the practical skills to act upon that, because even though Dovetail was able to support her from our side, it made it run a lot more smoothly with someone like Crystal who had that clarity.
Well, I think, that point you just made about, sort of practical experience, right? Sometimes just being on the ground and doing it, and and the tool just being able to react to what you're trying to achieve. Because, you know, what you had identified, Crystal, was a pretty strategic vision of this sort of low touch, but lots of information and the opportunity to collaborate when they wanted to. I mean, if you look at that diagram that I had showed, you had a pretty clear vision of where you wanted this to go and how it was going to help your HR function, but also how it would add value to the business. And I think a lot of people sort of think, you know, oftentimes doing things in a self-service way means like we're taking something away from people. You've turned this into we're adding value to people, right?
Absolutely.
And that's
I think that historically, because I have worked in this type of environment before, people have this misconception that we're just a bunch of robots, that we don't care, that we're gonna just, I use this language a lot, we use canned responses. But just because they're like a canned response doesn't mean that there wasn't a lot of thought and emotion that went into it when we created it. We're using those as a starting point to ensure that we're giving consistent answers, that we're making sure that we're you know, giving them other information that they may not know that they have. And so it doesn't have to take that personal side away from it. I think that really being able to improve the experience, employees won't necessarily mind if you make them do things self-service, if it's intuitive and they're able to find what they're looking for. If they go and they use this tool that isn't friendly, they're not going to adopt that model. And so those were the things that we really tried to focus on. And it really has, employees are ecstatic. They don't want to have to go bug a person. They're like, this has so much more information and I don't have to, I can access it at any time. So very exciting.
I love that. Well, and you may have then just answered this, but I'll ask you the last question. Then we've got 3 questions from the audience here that I want to get to, which is, okay, hindsight's 2020. We all know that if we could do things over, there's always something we would do a little bit better. If you had to like go back and talk to yourself 2 years ago before you started on this project, would there be any advice you'd give yourself or the audience who's maybe starting on this journey?
For sure. I would say, if I had a chance to do it over again, I would spend more time like getting executive buy-in, really helping them to understand not just the vision of what's going to change by using this different technology, but also spend probably more time with them kind of talking about how that was going to strategically change our ways of working, change the roles and responsibilities of the job. And so I think that was definitely something I would spend a little bit more time on. I think that now that we've put out the tool, we're kind of realizing that we need to go back in and do a little bit more of that work. I think that we focused really heavily on launching this knowledge and case management. While we though were looking at the overall experience, I think that if I was going to do this again, what I would do is also look at the processes that are going to touch those experiences, because that is a piece now that we're having to go back in and touch and clean up to see what we can harmonize, to see what we can standardize so that we can elevate the level of service that we're providing in some of those areas. Some things that we struggled with, some IT challenges, getting different people to be able to single sign on. So I think that I would have brought in some subject matter experts a little bit earlier into the process. But there were some things that just went so well. I would say that we did individual sessions with each different center of excellence, and we went over what their concerns were, what their requirements were on a one-on-one basis to really help understand their day-to-day and their ways of working so that we could design the system to really support that. And I would say that that went very well. And I was able to then collectively take all of their information, step back and make something that's, you know, could fit everybody's needs. So I think that went really well. I think that, you know, going forward, we are having our centers of excellence own all of that content. So that's something that's going really well. We did different things like a solution tracker that helped us kind of keep organized what was being created, what still needed to be created, what needed to be vetted by the Center of Excellence before we could actually publish it to our employees. I would say that went very well. So lots of opportunities there. I would say the biggest thing though is I would just probably spend a little bit more time with leadership and really getting them to understand what that would look like.
Well, I think a couple things you'd mentioned there, just to make sure everybody, solution tracker, that's awesome. The executive conversation, I think we've heard that a lot. But yeah, just some of the meetings, right? Those are real practical things. I think people can really invest in this. We had a couple of great conversations. I think you answered some of these, but I just want to see if there's any additionals we want to add to them. Jared asked which HCM systems are Danone using globally and how does Danone combine the data? You already said that, you do Dayforce. Dayforce feeds into this. Are there other feeds that you have in this, or do you pull data out of here to do a little bit more integration anywhere?
Right now, our only feed is out of Dayforce. Dovetail does have capabilities to do other APIs to other systems. We're just really young in our maturity level at this point. And so those will be definitely things that we'll be looking at down the road.
And Kelly, any add-ins to that of clients who are doing more integration of data as they've gotten more mature in the process, or is that something that's so individual it's hard to sort of get a handle on?
Yeah, I mean, that might be better answered by my colleague online in the chat, to be honest, that kind of technical integration with customers at the moment.
Gotcha. I was just going to say, if Kane's willing to open up the chat window just on audio, I'm more than happy. Kane, do you have a quick answer on that one for everyone in the audience? Oh, I think he's chatting it. Okay. We'll let Jarrett, we'll get back with you on some answers on that. All right, we're going to also, April asked, could you talk about how you get employees to adopt the self-service platforms? Her comment was, we recently rolled out an HR portal and have slow adoption thus far. And I think you mentioned a couple things, the scavenger hunt, the metrics. Anything else that you can think of that would be advice for April?
I think that too, like having all of our ongoing HR communications, when they go out, making sure they're pointing people back to the resource. We've struggled with that, quite honestly. Like sometimes I'll see an HR corp comm go out and it'll be pointing something to somebody's OneDrive or to, and I'm like, no, people, we need to push people back to the platform. It's that reinforcement is definitely going to help. Some other things that we did, I forgot to mention. So because our HR business partners were our first line of defense, obviously employees didn't know magically that we had changed our ways of working. And so we also armed our HR business partners. We created templates for them to be able to respond back to an employee and say, very quickly, hey, actually your team, you can find this information on the employee services Genie and they can open a case. And so really arming them with some tools as well to redirect employees back to that same to the same platform, and not just continue to do what you've always done and help them because you want to be seen as helpful.
I love that. So sometimes it's reining our own selves in. That helps out. That is really great. Last question we had from David Grayson, which is more on the case management metric side. He's asking, what actions have you taken based on those data and driven metrics? I don't know if you've had a chance to yet, Crystal. I know I have an example from a previous case study that Dovetail showed me. Have you guys taken any sort of action items yet that you can think of?
A whole lot. Quite honestly, I've been a little distracted with some other things that have been happening in my world, and so I haven't had the opportunity. But I'm definitely planning on diving in. I have had the ability to use some metrics to make some of those decisions before, and so looking forward to kind of jumping in and seeing how effective I can be at that.
Yeah, I know one example that Kelly and Kane had shared with me early on, right after the COVID crisis, was that they had been able to gather on an ongoing basis the metrics around not just people calling in questions about COVID, but where they were at and what challenges they were having. And so they were able to give some picture of the percentage of employees in the organization who were struggling with COVID or who were out of the office. And so I think we're starting to see that organizations are realizing that case management tools are more than just I'm going to have an answer for you. but that the data can actually give you a picture as to where your organization is struggling. And then you could quickly and rapidly respond to that with some open, and so in that particular case, I think they were able to roll out some very specific pointed COVID pandemic support tools that were needed in certain regions in certain areas. So Kane, I'm going to let you maybe follow up with Grace and maybe give them some additional examples on that, because I know those case studies are really powerful around what actions people have taken with this kind of data, because it does come down to the experience is great, the process is great, being able to get it. But to your point, Crystal, I think as we wrap up, it was all about the fact that you can now start to see what's happening. So everyone, I know we're over by just a minute, but hopefully this has given you what we promised, which is a nitty-gritty dive into how you think about experience for the employee I think at a level that we often don't get to. It's more than just the user interface. It's more than just talking about the various applications. It is talking about how they use the tools and what they're getting out of it. And if anybody has any additional questions, please feel free to send them on to myself or Kelly or Crystal. Our contact information, I think, is on the information. Everyone will be receiving an email following this that will have not only a copy of the slide deck, but a recording of the presentation, as well as you'll be getting a survey. And we would really like to have you give us some feedback on how well this presentation went, what was valuable and not valuable in the conversation, what we can do better each time we're doing this. We're always trying to improve. That's part of the process. So I want to say thanks to everyone. Kelly, just a quick, you want to say goodbye to everyone and last comment for our audience?
Yeah, I mean, so thanks for everybody registering and turning up to watch this webinar, and thank you very much, Crystal, for taking part, and you, Stacey, for running it.
Yeah, enjoy working with everyone. And Crystal, how about you? Last comments for everyone?
No, I just hope that you can see the big impact that this change had to our organization. Definitely something that I'm super passionate about, and I'm always going to be looking to improve. So thank you so much for letting me be here today.
Thanks, everyone. It's such a pleasure to have you all here. Have any questions, feel free to contact us at Sapient Insights. We'll make sure any questions you have get on to the Dovetail team as well. And everyone have a good afternoon, and hopefully the continued education around the experience platform will be adding to this big pile of conversation today. So thanks, everyone. Bye.
Thank you.